Hi guys, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. So greatly appreciate it. Before we start, let me give my usual disclaimer that this video is for educational purposes only. Please do not take what I say as fact. Please always do your own research. Please always come to your own conclusions. Next, if you have not liked, subscribed, or commented yet, please do so. It really helps me out. Just remember to always keep it classy and respectful in the comment section. And with that, let's start. Diane Oakwood was born on September 27th, 1947 in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, which is just outside of Milwaukee. She was one of 6 siblings, 2 older brothers named Dennis and Edward, and 3 sisters, Nancy, Patty, and Debbie. She was engaged to a man named Donald at the time, who was in the Army and was currently in basic training in Fort Hood, Texas. She worked at Kenworth Manufacturing Company, which was a metal stamping plant that had about 25 employees. Most of the employees would only work until 3:30 in the afternoon, but Diane, who was the only secretary there, wouldn't leave work until about 4:30. So she was essentially alone for at least an hour, 5 days a week. Every day after work, Diane would pick up her best friend, Diane Zimmer, and the two would drive home together. But on November 3rd, 1986, Diane never showed up. And as the time ticked by, the friend became concerned and she asked her boss's wife to take her over to Kenworth so she could go check on the whereabouts of her friend. When the two arrived at the factory, they found Diane's car in the parking lot. They looked through a window and they saw her purse on the desk and her coat hung up, but there was no sign of Diane. So because Diane's brother worked at the plant next door, they went over there and to inform him, and the 3 of them then walked back over to Diane's job. And just as they're arriving at Diane's job, a foreman was there to do some after hours work. So he would end up unlocking the shipping door for them. They walk in and they find Diane face down in a pool of her own blood about 20 feet from the door. She had been stabbed 106 times in the chest, neck, and head, with the cause of death being massive hemorrhaging due to the wounds. James Welch, the county coroner, said that Diane was stabbed 30 times in the head, 35 times in a row down the side of her back. She also had a broken nose and defensive wounds on her arms and her hands. The door to the factory was unlocked, and there were no signs of SA. Even though her dress was pulled up and partly off her shoulders, her undergarments were undisturbed. Her funeral was held at St. Mary's Church, and over 250 people attended this funeral, including her distraught fiancé. During the Mass, the pastor of the church pleaded with the person responsible for this to please turn himself in, and for the rest of the congregation to pray for him or her. Police have a theory. They theorize that on November 3rd, Diane was getting ready to leave for the day. They believe that whoever did this was very familiar with the layout of the plant. They knew Diane was alone for at least the last hour of every workday, 5 days a week. They also strongly believe that Diane knew the person that did this to her because of the amount of wounds. They also believe that whoever did do this to her had taken her by surprise. The weeks following Diane's death, police zeroed in on 6 strong suspects, but each one of them ended up having very strong alibis. Diane's family actually strongly believed that her boss's son was the one that was responsible for her death, saying that Diane was terrified of him and that he had been bugging Diane to go out with him, but Diane wasn't interested, plus she was engaged to somebody. Police investigated this lead, but he ended up having a very strong alibi for that day. Diane's death would tear her entire family apart. Her mother died in 1973 at the age of 50. Her father died just 3 years later. Her sister Debbie and her brother Dennis followed shortly after. So, siblings Patty, Debbie, and Edward are all that remain in this very large, very tight-knit family. They just pray that there will be some sort of closure soon. And I really hope that they get it before the last 3 pass. Okay, let's talk the Dardeen family. This is not an easy one to listen to. I'm just going to put it right out there from Jump Street. This is very difficult to listen to. And there's little guys involved. Just want you to know that. Okay. 30-year-old Keith Dardeen, his wife Ruby, by all accounts, were a hardworking family who were smart and kind. Elaine worked at an office supply store, and Keith worked at a local water treatment plant. They lived in a really small town in Illinois called Ena. Ena? The town has 1 traffic light, a store called Uncle Joe's where you can get fried bologna sandwiches and fried pickles. After that, it's pretty much a gas station, funeral home, antique store, and Baptist church. Keith and Elaine were part of the musical ensemble at their church, where Keith would sing lead vocals and Elaine would play the piano. They had moved there just 1 year earlier with their 3-year-old son, Peter, and Elaine was actually 7 months pregnant with a little girl that they were going to name Casey, and where they purchased a mobile home on the outskirts of the city. Keith's mother, well, I guess Keith's family, really, went to visit them often, and she would say that on one of her visits, Keith told the family that he wanted to move back to Mount Carmel, which was about 80 miles away, because he told his mother that there was too much crime in the area and that the family had planned on putting the trailer up for sale and moving back after the baby was born in January. But that didn't happen.
He said, we're going to move our mobile home and we're going to move back to Mount Carmel in January. I said, why are you coming back? He said, there's just too many things happening down here. There's people being murdered and robbed and just all kinds of meanness. And he said, I don't like it.
November 17th, 1987. Keith fails to show up for work for his night shift, and nobody can reach the family. Keith's parents call the police and head over to the trailer with a spare key to meet with the police. Side note, give somebody you truly trust a key to your home in case of emergencies. My mother has a key to my home, and she actually has had to use it before. So if you don't have a trusted person that holds a spare key to your home, maybe you should consider doing so. Okay, so police and Keith's parents walk into the unthinkable.
The crime happened in this mobile home in 1987. Investigators say the Dardeen family was brutally murdered. Elaine and their son Peter were bound death. Elaine, 7 months pregnant at the time, prematurely gave birth during the to a little girl who was also
Elaine was mutilated and beaten to death with a bat. So was her 3-year-old son, Peter. And the baby girl, Casey, actually was delivered during this. And she suffered the same fate. All three, Elaine, Peter, and Casey, were found in the parents' bed, tucked under the covers, like tucked into bed together. But Keith and Keith's car were nowhere to be found. There was no sign of a break-in, and there was no cash or jewelry missing. So Keith immediately becomes the main suspect, and obviously, you can't blame them for that. But Keith's friends and family say, no way he did this. Hell to no. No way he did this. And they would end up being right.
The best man at their wedding. And to find out a few years later, they'd been so brutally murdered. And yet we're not any closer to really solving this than we were after it happened. It's very disheartening. They said there's no way I could even give any credibility to that thought whatsoever, because I knew he couldn't have done that. He just could not have ever done something like that.
Keith was found the next day in a wheat field a mile away, shot 3 times in the face. The county coroner determined that all of the family members were killed within an hour of each other, but unsure of who went first, like what the order was. Family and friends of the Dardeen family have their own theories, though.
I believe somebody wanted him to do something, and I believe that he flat out refused. Well, we'll show you. You do it our way or no way.
The family car would be found the next day, splattered with blood, and parked right in front of the Benton Police Department and next door to the Franklin County Courthouse. Savage. That is savage. 30 detectives worked this case full time. They interviewed more than 100 people and followed up on more than 1,500 leads. But ultimately, came up empty. Years would go by and nothing. Then comes Tommy Lynn Sells. This guy's. Sells was convicted of. Sorry, before we do this, it's going to get rough again, just so you know, okay? Sells was convicted of murdering 13-year-old Kayleen Harris in Del Rio, Texas, by sitting on her throat. He also attempted to murder 10-year-old Crystal Searles by cut her throat. But thankfully she survived. This 10-year-old girl, she helped police composite a sketch of Sells, picked him out of a lineup, and testified against him in court, 10 years old. She was a baby. She was so brave. So brave. Sells would also claim that he killed upwards of 70 people throughout the country, but later admitted to fabricating some of his stories. Authorities claim that at least 24 credible deaths that he is responsible for. And soon, officers from all sorts of towns wanted to know if he visited their town at any point in time in hopes of being able to close some of their cold cases. Tommy Lee Sells started telling police that he had met Keith Dardeen at a truck stop before changing his story to that he met him at a pool hall. He claims that Keith invited him to his house for dinner, where he had rendezvous with both Keith and Elaine. When police pressed him for answers to questions that were not released to the public yet, he answered incorrectly and then blurted out correct responses. So police felt that he only had answers to the questions that were already made public, and the answers that were not made public were the ones that he was guessing at. That's why he would get them wrong and then get them right. Sells had already been on death row in Texas. Texas, you guys don't play around. I like it. I got mad respect for Texas. They don't play around. Texas law refuses to allow their death row inmates from being removed. They don't fuck around. That's what I love about Texas. Texas would grant a jailhouse interview with Sells to Bill Clutter of Investigating Innocence. He told Bill that the Dardeens were targeted and that they would find a pile of beer cans where he had waited for them. He says he went into the trailer and took control of Elaine and Peter, duct taped them, and waited for Keith to come home. He told him about watermelon ceramics that were in the Dardeen home. But family and friends of the Dardeens say no such plates existed in the Dardeen home to their knowledge. With all the inconsistencies, Jefferson County State's attorney decided that there were too many of them to charge Sells, and he was put to death, but he was put to death anyway in Texas in 2014, 14 years after claiming responsibility for the Dardeen. So who was Sells? Sells grew up in southeast Missouri. He began drinking at 7, was S8 at 8, tried to R-word his mother at 13, and his family would move without telling him at 14. He said his killing spree began at 15. At 17, he moved to the St. Louis area to live with relatives. By his 20s, he was a heavy drinker and drug user, and he would later become a drifter in a carnival. Federal prosecutors later determined that there was a large conspiracy that somehow connected the hard-working, church-singing Keith by mistake. But there are no answers as to how or why.
I think they made Keith witness what happened because the duct tape was removed and Keith was taken about a mile away, execution style. That was a disturbing interview. You know, I mean, how cavalier he was about killing people. I mean, he described the thrill he got. That was the fact that convinced the Texas Rangers to consider that a corroborated confession, because for him to know that, he had to have been inside that house.
Alicia Jackson. 25-year-old Alicia Jackson of Columbus, Ohio, was the daughter of Elder Kevin Jackson and Marion Jackson. She was the sister of Trevin Jackson and the proud mommy to her 3-year-old son, Eugene Jeremiah Wilson. She was described as a warm and loving person. She participated in numerous school activities and organizations. She was a graduate of Central Dauphin East High School, where she was homecoming queen and voted most likely to impact the world. Only the good. Only the good. After this, Alicia would go on to earn a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from Ohio State University. This would also be where she would meet and fall in love with her fiancé and father of her child, Eugene Wilson. The couple would hit a rough patch and end up having some trouble when a then pregnant Alicia found out that her fiancé, Eugene, had cheated on her and got another woman pregnant at the same time as her. So both these women are pregnant with his kid at the same time. I know I said that really fast. Oh my gosh. Nevertheless, Alicia decided to forgive her fiancé, and that's her decision to forgive him. It's her business. She wants to keep her family together. She's an adult and she can make those decisions. She decided to forgive him, and the couple had planned on moving to Texas. Sadly, shortly before the couple was ready to move, Alicia would be found murdered. December 2nd, 2010, at 9:20 p.m., Alicia's fiancé finds Alicia covered in blood with more than 30 stab wounds to her head, face, neck, chest, and arm. Her baby, her son, was in the high chair, unharmed, thankfully, but the TV was on, the stove was on, but there was no sign of a break-in. No charges have been filed, no suspects have been publicly identified, and Alicia's fiancé is not currently a suspect.
You keep wondering, how can somebody hate somebody and be evil to that degree that they would take a life, especially in that fashion, and live with themselves? Shared that initially with my mother, and I'll never forget the wail from her in the bedroom. Wow.
It's one thing to pass away, it's another thing to pass away young, it's another thing to be ill, but it's another thing to be in the way that she was, and then to ice the cake in front of her most prized possession.
When Alicia was killed, her younger brother Trevin lost one of his biggest supporters.
And I wanted to call her, I wanted to text her, and I expected her, I almost subconsciously expected her to be there when I was going back home for her funeral. And I had to keep telling myself that, no, this is her funeral you're going to.
Now in his 30s and living in North Carolina, Trevin is finally able to bring himself to talk about his sister's death.
Definitely the most difficult day I've ever went through.
I will tell you my conspiracy theories. I have no proof of this. Zero proof of this. But I think it was the other woman. Or it was the other woman and the fiancé together. That is my conspiracy theory. What is yours? Do you agree with me or no? I steadfastly believe that it was the other woman or the other woman and the fiancé. But there was no sign of a break-in, so it was probably the other woman and the fiancé together. That's my theory. What is your theory? Do you agree with me? Cecilia and Ann Cattigan. Former school teachers. 90-year-old Ann and her sister, 85-year-old Cecilia, lived in their 2-story farmhouse about 20 miles east of Green Bay, Wisconsin. They're really cute. They love little ladies. November 16th, 1991 was a 43-degree day. Cecilia jotted down on her calendar that the sisters had planned to go to eat dinner early for Cecilia's birthday and were then expected to attend Mass at Holy Trinity Catholic Church, but they never made it. At about 6 p.m., the sisters' neighbors found them both brutally and fatally stabbed to death in their living room. Nine-year-old Anne was slumped over her favorite chair. 85-year-old Cecilia was under a toppled-over couch. There was blood all over their rose-colored carpet, and the two sisters' purses were stolen. The killer left DNA all over the scene, including on one of the weapons that was used. But at the time, DNA was still in its infancy and hadn't emerged yet as like this powerful tool that we use today to identify people. Authorities followed up on suspects based on hunches and circumstantial evidence. They would clear suspect after suspect after suspect from 1991 to 1994. June 1995. Police would focus on Beth Labatt of Green Bay as their new prime suspect, after Beth ended up in prison for violating her probation. Beth and her boyfriend, Chuck Benoit of Sturgeon Bay, had been involved in a slew of burglaries and break-ins together. December 23rd, 1996. Beth is arrested and charged with the murders of Cecilia and Ann Cattigan. Did I say Cardigan? It's Cattigan. I keep doing that. It's Cattigan. January 24th, 1997. Beth's boyfriend, Chuck, is arrested and charged as well. December 1997. Beth's jury trial is moved to Appleton. Several jailhouse informants testified that Beth had confessed to them that she was responsible for the deaths of the Cattigan sisters. The jury would end up finding Beth guilty on all counts. This is so incredibly effed up, and you're going to find out why. January 1998. A jury from Port Washington finds Beth's boyfriend Chuck not guilty of felony murder and not guilty of armed robbery. During his trial, the lawyer showed the jury that Chuck and Beth had not even met until 3 months after the Cattigan sisters had died. February 11th, 1998, the Agami County judge sentences Beth to a mandatory life sentence. It's coming. It's coming. May 2004. The trial judge decides to allow the Wisconsin Innocence Project to proceed with DNA testing on several of the crime scene items that were gathered. DNA was found on one of the weapons, a pool stick that had actually snapped during the attack. It was a male profile. The sales tag from the stick was traced back to a Kmart in Sturgeon Bay. The killer also left behind his white socks that he used to wipe up Cecilia's blood. The co-director of the Wisconsin Innocence Project said that law enforcement's reliance on the federal criminal database to find a DNA match is a major reason why this case has become so cold. His team, who took on Beth Labatt's case, would end up winning her exoneration and clearing her name in November of 2005. The co-director went on to say that he was a little surprised and disappointed that the investigation was never reopened and that they never got any additional information from them. He also says that prosecutors in this case convicted Beth with no physical evidence and no eyewitnesses linking her to the scene. They instead relied on now discredited testimony from jailhouse informants that testified to Beth confessing to them. That's awful. I get that you want to find out who did this to these sisters. I want to know who did this to these sisters. They're so cute. And I get that her and her boyfriend were involved in a string of robberies. Not cool. But, and however, it is less cool to throw somebody in jail just because you want to close a case. There's no excuse for that. After Beth's exoneration, she moved to Fond du Lac County, where she lived with a boyfriend. September 1st, 2007, just 2 years after her release, Beth goes to a bar and she later drives home. During her drive home, she loses control of her truck and she fatally hits a ditch. Authorities determined that Beth's blood alcohol level was 0.21, 2 times more than the legal limit. That's supposed to make her a killer. But no, don't do that. Labatt's mom said that her daughter's wrongful conviction brings up a lot of hurt. She sat through an entire trial and then had to watch her innocent daughter go to prison while the real person responsible is still eluding justice. Her ex-boyfriend, who is now in his 60s and living in Green Bay, says that he has since turned his life around, but he will forever be tainted by wrongful conviction. And I agree with that. He probably will be. Okay, guys, if you're still here, thank you. I appreciate you and love you so very much. Please leave me a like and a comment. Please consider subscribing if you feel so inclined to. Tell me what you think. Tell me your conspiracy theories. I want to hear them. I want to hear if you agree with me or what your theories are. And until next time, be safe out there.